The debate over whaling since the establishment of current policies by the International Whaling Commission, or IWC, has become an increasingly relevant topic over the past few decades, as countries such as Japan and the United States have begun to view the issue quite differently, prompting the question, how do current whaling policies create conflict between cultures?
It is, however, the use of loopholes in international law and the accusations over these abuses by various countries which leads to conflict.
Historically, whaling has been a significant part of many cultures, as demonstrated in Herman Melville's novel, Moby Dick. For although the whaling presented in this novel has declined over time, this novel still remains one of the most recognized accounts of whaling, especially as Western whaling was an important economic practice during the 19th century.
During the colonial and industrial era, as stated by the New Bedford Museum, Western whaling was done for the collection of resources such as bone, oil, and meat, and therefore made it rather important economically. However, nearing the end of the industrial era, whaling lost most of its popularity due to the discovery of new resources, the dangers it posed, and the risk of extinction it had, as Sky will explain.
With the advent of new technologies, whales are being exploited at a faster rate than ever before. A model known as the economics of extinction, developed by Colin W. Clark, a professor emeritus at the University of British Columbia, has allowed countries and private companies to drastically increase their profits from whaling at the expense of the environment. The model, based on the principle of scarcity, states as a certain species becomes more scarce, people are willing to pay a higher price for the products from the species, thus increasing the profit for the country or company. This capitalistic exploitation has drastically decreased the whale's population and, if continued, could destroy fragile ecosystems.
Whales are important to the ecosystems of which they inhabit. When a whale dies, its body sinks to the ocean floor. If this is done over shallow water, the body will be consumed rather quickly by scavengers. However, if this is done over deep water, it will become what scientists call a whale fall, which are rather important ecological habitats that occur from the whale's carcass. However, whaling has majorly decreased these whale falls due to taking the whales entirely out of the ocean.
However, native tribes practice whaling in a way that can be beneficial for the environment. By processing the whale in water in order to remove valuable parts such as blubber, baleen, and spermaceti, they allow the majority of the whale to sink, nourishing the ocean.
In fact, Aboriginal whaling has increased the number of whale falls during the 19th century, according to Professor of Oceanography of the University of Hawaii, Craig Smith.
Debate over what constitutes tribal whaling has severely impacted modern whaling and its effectiveness. Whereas the IWC has no set definition, the interpretation of Aboriginal whaling can be exploited for commercial purposes.
As the professor of law, Hope Babcock, has stated, nations such as Japan, Iceland, and Norway have used the Aboriginal exemption to increase their own efforts in whaling. And though this whaling underneath the exemption is not necessary, it, as stated by Charlotte Cote of the Nuu-chah-nulth tribe, is necessary to these tribes as it will increase their own whaling and economic identity.
Currently, the only legal form of whaling is the aforementioned Aboriginal whaling. Thus, commercial whaling and the sale of whale meat are prohibited. However, the IWC continues to allow scientific whaling, which permits countries to whale through the device of research.
Currently, the majority of scientific whaling being performed is in Japan with their Jarpon-2 study, with an annual catch of 150 minke whales, 50 bryce whales, 10 sperm whales, and 50 sato whales. There are fundamental problems, though, with the Jarpon-2 study, including a lack of testable hypothesis, ineffective use of ecosystem models, unreliable and an unnecessary reliance on legal.
Several solutions can solve these problems at least to some extent.
First of all, the IWC could close the scientific whaling loophole. As demonstrated in this graph by World Wildlife Fund for Nature, the amount of whales being killed under the scientific whaling loophole is dramatically increased. Thus, closing the loophole would allow whale populations to recuperate.
However, as previously mentioned, the Japanese are the main abusers of this clause, and unfortunately, they have also constantly insisted that their research is necessary for understanding their environment, although there is much evidence to the contrary.
Another solution consists of creating a more concrete definition for the term Aboriginal whaling. That would require First Nations and Aboriginal whalings to use traditional whaling methods that are beneficial to the environment while still allowing to keep their cultural heritage alive.
However, this solution is somewhat unrealistic given the fact that the IWC has attempted to define this definition since its own creation. As this graph from 2010 shows, 406 whales were killed underneath this vague definition.
Lastly, enforcing the policies already set by the IWC is an alternate solution, as doing so would stop the utilization of loopholes by the whaling industry, while also ending any illegal whaling that may occur, thus allowing the recuperation of whales.
Sadly, the cost of doing so and the amount of resources needed would be simply overwhelming. Countries that do allocate money to the IWC allocate very little or none at all, as proven in the IWC's 2015 record of financial contributions. Furthermore, prominent nations such as Japan, Norway, and Iceland oppose restrictions set by the IWC.
Overall, the debate over whaling constitutes a serious issue to the environment and to the cultural heritage that is the foundation of current laws. By enforcing current policies and fixing regulations, it would allow for the environment to recover from past whaling practices while still permitting Aboriginals to keep their cultural heritage alive. Although it may be costly, it is the best way to restore whale populations to their historical numbers.
Thank you, and save the whales.
Thank you. I just have a few questions for you. We'll start with Sky. Sky, describe how the content of the team presentation was changed as a result of group discussion.
Well, it changed. We went over different ways of how to lay out the presentation. On the wall over here we have a poster of what we finally came up with, but it went over many different permutations of, we had one variation that focused more heavily on the Aboriginal whaling and how their culture was more prevalent in the whaling industry, but after further research we decided to change that to what we have now, where we shrunk the Aboriginal portion quite a bit.
Thank you. Sabriana, explain how did the group decide to include Emilio's perspective or lens or conclusions into the overall presentation?
Emilio's research played a major role in our presentation, as Emilio had researched the Aboriginal side of our topics, and it was incorporated in both the solution and through our background, and it just shows how important it is in general to our presentation.
Thank you. Emilio, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Well, actually, Brandon's research really demonstrated how whaling still poses a very significant problem in our world. I mean, historically whaling has been a problem, but thinking in modern day terms, you would think that it's really insignificant. But by demonstrating how Japan and scientific whaling has impacted the whale population and so the ecosystem. It really shed a new light on the importance of whaling.
Thank you. And Brandon, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
So first of all, I have to say we picked a topic that it was easier for us to work with, and so improve in a group, you said. So basically, I learned how to be more on task with things and stay focused, and we all kept each other on task, and we all stayed communicated with one another so there was no gaps, and we all played our part.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.